Hi, and welcome to AMC at the Movies. I'm Jon Spurney. Today, we're going to be talking about technology and Hollywood. Movies are perhaps the most transporting, emotionally immediate form of entertainment ever made. And when we're sitting in a dark theater, we're completely transfixed and involved in the action on the screen. And because of the immediacy of this experience, the experience of watching a film, this enveloping power of image and sound, we can be completely lost in the narrative and caught up in this inexorable power of the cinematic experience. But I think it's important to remember that this emotional experience is completely predicated on technology, right? Cinema is a mechanical art form. What we're experiencing is the result of machines, right? And so the experience of watching a film has always, from the art form's very inception, been based on the machines that create the images and sounds that provide us with all these emotional experiences that make watching movies so powerful and so rewarding. And so throughout the history of cinema, changes and advances in technology have affected not only the way Hollywood tells stories, but the stories themselves. So today, we're going to look at some of the ways historically that technological innovations changed the way that movies are made, and subsequently the way that we perceive movies themselves. And always, just as a warning, we're talking about the golden age of American cinema here, basically the 1930s through the 1950s. So we will not be talking about CGI or all the ways that digital technology has changed cinema in our era. We're talking more about historical changes during Hollywood's golden age. So the first thing I want to talk about is montage. It's important to remember that the first films people watched for entertainment were comprised of a single shot. Editing did not exist. What we now know of as editing didn't need to exist because at the time when films first started, the experience of seeing a picture actually move was so novel and unprecedented when cinema was invented in the late 19th century, that audiences were amazed just by the experience of seeing moving pictures at all. And so good examples of these early one-shot films are those made by the Lumiere brothers in France in the late 19th century. Auguste and Louis Lumiere were brothers who invented one of the first working cinema cameras in history. And they patented the well-known process whereby sprockets are used to move perforated film through a camera or a projector. And they were some of the first people to ever project movies on a screen. Prior to the invention of projection, movies could only be viewed by a single person at a time through a machine with a viewfinder that would be hand cranked by this solitary viewer. So the invention of projection was incredibly important in and of itself because it made moviegoing a communal experience. So the films that the Lumieres made, which they called actualities, were just simple one-shot movies showing frankly banal aspects of everyday life around Lyon, France, which is where the Lumieres were based. And each film consisted of just one shot, lasted around 50 seconds. But again, at the time, the experience of seeing pictures actually move was so novel that this was literally enough to hold audiences spellbound. So for example, the film Workers Leaving the Lumiere Factory shows exactly what the title implies. It's one unbroken shot of men and women leaving the Lumiere factory at the end of a working day. But this was enough to satisfy audiences at the time. And you can see it's one shot, the camera doesn't move, Really not that much happens, but in 1895, this was incredible. This was the equivalent of the Fast and the Furious. Um, and the sort of classic example of the Lumiere brothers' actuality is the film The Arrival of a Train at La Ciotat Station, which was made by the brothers in 1896. This was one of the first films ever projected for an audience. And supposedly audiences were so terrified by this train approaching, they thought it was a real train hurtling towards them. They ran away from the screen screaming, thinking they were going to get hit by a train. So that just shows you where we're at, how incredibly new and affecting movies were at the time. So this film is really, despite the fact that not very much happens, it's really one of the iconic moments in cinema history, which I know seems fantastic now. But during this early period of cinema, it was actually Russian filmmakers that developed the concept of editing, composing more sophisticated narratives that were constructed using more than a single shot. And even more importantly, these early Russian filmmakers developed the concept of montage. So what is montage? Montage is a French word that simply means assembly. But the concept Russian filmmakers developed at the time by that name was more complicated than that. Basically, the fundamental concept was that the juxtaposition of two shots created a new meaning independent of the content of the shots themselves, and was based more so on the relationship between the two shots. So the most famous early theorist of montage was a Russian filmmaker named Lev Kuleshov. Kuleshov was a filmmaker in Moscow in the 1920s, and he created a series of famous film experiments that exemplify this phenomenon, which is now named for him and known as the Kuleshov effect. So Kuleshov showed audiences juxtapositions of an actor with various other shots and found that audiences made assumptions about the actor's emotions based on the shots he cut from, not from the actor's reaction, because the shot of the actor himself was always the same and the actor's expression never changed. So these are the actual films that he showed people. So for example, if the audience saw a bowl of soup and then a shot of the actor, they said the actor was hungry. If they saw a dead child and then the actor, they said he was sad. If they saw a beautiful woman and then the actor, they said he was lustful. But the shot of the actor, as you can see, was always exactly the same. His expression never changed. And so Kuleshov figured out that it was the juxtaposition of the shots. It was the two shots together that created meaning, not the content of the individual shots themselves. So the theory of montage became a central component of Soviet silent filmmaking and was hugely influential on American filmmakers in Hollywood. And one of the most striking examples of Soviet montage can be seen in the 1929 experimental documentary Man with a Movie Camera, which was made by Soviet filmmaker Dziga Vertov. Vertov used incredibly rapid cutting and other visual techniques, as you can see here, to express a single day in a Russian city. And this fast cutting of Man with a Movie Camera was completely novel to American filmmakers. This movie contains approximately 1,775 shots, about 4 times more than would be found in a normal Hollywood film in 1929. It's a really interesting film, and I highly recommend it. And we can see the influence of Russian montage and rapid cutting in the work of Alfred Hitchcock, who was, of course, one of the most famous directors of Hollywood's golden age. Hitchcock often cited the influence of Russian filmmaker Sergei Eisenstein on his work, on Hitchcock's work. Eisenstein was a, sorry, I'm going forward. Eisenstein was a student of Vertov's and was highly influenced by the theories of Kuleshov. And he utilized these techniques in his silent masterpiece, The Battleship Potemkin, in 1925. This is the famous Odessa Steps sequence in that film. Again, another great Soviet silent film that I highly recommend, and very influential on American filmmakers. And you can see the influence of Russian montage and rapid cutting on Hitchcock reach full flower, really, in the very famous shower scene from Psycho, which was made in 1960. And like the fast cutting in Man with a Movie Camera, this scene uses 78 camera shots and 52 cuts to comprise a sequence that lasts only 45 seconds. And like the montage experiments of Kuleshov, there's never a single shot where we see the knife actually penetrate the flesh of Janet Leigh, but we know and assume, we know she's being stabbed because of the juxtaposition of the shots. And, you know, this is one of the most famous sequences in American cinema history. And it really only exists because of the pioneering work of Russian Soviet filmmakers in the 1920s. It was really Russian filmmakers that developed editing and montage, which became incredibly important, obviously, in American cinema and all cinema. So another technological advance that is extremely important, obviously, is sound. Probably the most important technological change that affected the history of American cinema. And sound was added to motion pictures in 1927. So it's important to remember that all films everywhere in the world were silent for essentially the first 30 years of the art form's existence. And of course, films were not completely silent because there was always live musical accompaniment to go along with the screenings. And this accompaniment took different forms depending on where you were watching a film. If you were watching a film, for example, in one of the lavish movie palaces in a big city like New York, there would be a full orchestra accompanying the film. But if you lived in a small town somewhere in the middle of America, there would simply be a pianist providing live accompaniment. And this accompaniment was almost always completely improvised by the pianist. The studios would send out cue sheets with each picture that had a list of well-known classical pieces that could be played during particular scenes. But by all accounts, these cue sheets were roundly ignored by the pianists. So the musical accompaniment to a film during the silent era would be completely different every time you saw a movie, even if you saw the film twice in the same day, because the pianists were just making it up as they went along, watching the film and improvising in real time. And I actually know this for a fact because I've done it myself. When I lived in New York City, I used to perform live piano accompaniment for screenings of silent films at the Museum of Modern Art. And I can just tell you, I played for the same film many times, and what I played was different every time. And interestingly, some of the most successful film composers of the sound era got their start as silent film pianists, which, you know, makes sense because you learn how to accompany picture, you know, how music can work with picture. Most notably of these was Carl Stalling, who composed all the incredible scores for the Warner Brothers animation during the 40s and 50s. He started his career as a silent movie pianist. But pretty much from the inception of cinema, people had been trying to figure out how to synchronize sound recording with film projection. And there were really sort of two possible ways to do this. Sound on disc in which the playing of a vinyl phonograph record was synchronized with a projector, or sound on film, in which the soundtrack was photographically recorded onto a strip of the motion picture itself, so that the sound and image were perfectly married onto one strip of celluloid that ran through the projector. And so this technique, the sound on film technique, was the ultimate winner and became the basis of all sound film until the advent of digital technology in the 1990s. But ironically, it was actually a sound on disc film that became famous as the first so-called talking picture, or talkie. And this was The Jazz Singer, a film made in 1927 starring Al Jolson, which used Warner Brothers' Vitagraph system, which was a disc-based system. Here's a clip from that movie.
Goodbye. Good, don't cry. A little choo-choo train that takes me away from you. You don't know just how sad it makes me. Kiss me pretty and then out, do it over again. Watch for the mail, I'll never fail. If you don't get a letter, then you know I'm in jail. Hey, don't cry, Tootsie, don't cry. Kiss me, Tootsie, goodbye.
So I don't think we can possibly understand what a sensation that created the first time people saw a talking picture. And it's something we totally take for granted. Interestingly, The Jazz Singer is actually largely a silent movie. It actually has intertitles, the titles that come up that tell you what people are saying. But it has a synchronized music score, and like we just saw, the musical numbers have synchronized dialogue and sound. And it was really created a sensation, completely changed the business and the art form. And incredibly, I live in Los Angeles. The soundstage where this film was made, there on the left, still exists here in Los Angeles on Sunset Boulevard. I drive by it all the time, and you can see it on the right today, and it's literally now owned by Netflix, and it's where Netflix shoots a lot of their stuff. So it's incredible that the soundstage where the first sound movie was made in 1927 is still being used today by Netflix to watch the streaming content we all enjoy today. So, sound radically altered the way cinematic stories were told. And interestingly, many accomplished artists and directors of the silent era felt that the advent of sound actually diminished the art form. They thought of the art form as its power was that it was a visual medium, and sound took away from that. Sound was somehow cheating. And it is true that the technical limitations of early sound technology negatively affected the way movies could be shot. Silent films had progressed so much that by 1927, silent films had reached a level of incredible visual sophistication and camera movement. This is exemplified in F.W. Murnau's film Sunrise. We see a shot from here, which is considered by many to be the greatest silent film ever made. And this shot, this is just an incredibly complicated oneer. And this is shot on a soundstage, and they literally hung the camera from the ceiling on a track that follows the actor. And I mean, you look at this shot and it looks like a Steadicam shot of today. It's an incredibly sophisticated shot. This is in 1927 on a soundstage. And especially this thing at the end where the camera goes through the bushes, right, to find the woman who's waiting for her lover. And, this is just incredibly sophisticated, and no digital trickery like that is a practical effect. That is just a moving camera. And that was where silent films were at visually at the point where sound came in. But with the advent of sound, cameras could not move like that anymore. They had to remain rooted to wherever the microphone was. And in addition, noisy cameras had to be covered by what were known as blimps, which you can see in this picture. That's a camera inside this huge soundproof casing, so that the microphone didn't pick up the sound of the camera motors. And that made the cameras themselves even more immobile. And so a lot of people chafed against that. You could have sound, but you couldn't have a moving camera. Occasionally, they would have to hide microphones on the sets, inside a flower pot, and that produced varying results. And a really good parody of how that worked is in the great musical from 1952, Singing in the Rain, which is a musical about the transition to sound. In this clip, they're watching an early sound movie. The movie takes place in the 1920s, and the actress, the microphone is hidden in the flowers, the corsage on the actress's shoulder, and with bad results.
Could remember where the microphone was, boss.
Tis Cupid himself that calls you here. And I, bitten by his arrow,
What you hitting him with a blackjack?
I love you. 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 I love you.
Did somebody get paid for writing that dialogue?
So obviously that's an exaggeration. It's a parody, but it's really not far from the truth. If you watch early sound pictures from the late 20s, early 30s, there are a lot of problems like those in that movie because they just hadn't figured out yet how to where to put the microphone, basically. And another really interesting thing is in those very early sound pictures, when there's musical accompaniment, there was literally an orchestra off camera playing the score in real time as the actors performed, because that was the only way they could get both the sound of the orchestra and the sound of the actors into the microphone at the same time, which is pretty incredible. So every take, the orchestra would have to start the score again. And in addition to all those problems, many actors' careers were unceremoniously ended with the advent of sound because maybe they had heavy accents or they had a voice that didn't match the way audiences thought they would sound. And one of the saddest examples of this is the silent film actor Carl Dane, who actually killed himself when sound came in because he had such a heavy foreign accent. He had a Danish accent. He was no longer able to get work in the sound era, and his career ended. And sadly, he took his own life. But eventually, pioneering director Dorothy Arzner, who was literally one of only 2 female directors in Hollywood at the time, she invented the boom microphone. She literally had her crew attach a microphone to a fishing rod, and that became the key to allowing the camera to become mobile again, and leading to the modern era where we have both sound and a mobile camera. So thank you, Dorothy. Another radical change in movie technology in the classic era that had far-reaching effects on American cinema was, of course, the advent of color. And symbolically, I think probably no single scene better symbolizes the advent of color in Hollywood than the famous change from black and white to color in The Wizard of Oz, which I assume everybody has seen 1,000 times. But this is the scene. So the beginning of the movie is all shot in black and white. It's tinted sepia, this sort of brown color, to make it look like an old-time photograph, but it's shot in black and white. This shot, I'm pausing, this shot is actually in color. And what they did was they knew she was going to open the door to the set in color. So this is a set painted to look as if it's shot in black and white and tinted sepia. That's color, but the set is painted to look black and white. And when Dorothy steps in here, that is not Judy Garland. That is a double wearing a costume that looks as if it's in black and white, that looks as if it's been toned in sepia. So this is a color shot, and her costume is made to look as if it's not in color. And when she opens the door, you'll see she steps out of the frame. We see the colored set because it's a colored shot. And then the real Judy Garland steps into the shot in the appropriately colored costume. So it's a really effective, practical effect. It just works great. And I think every kid who's ever seen this movie, their mind is blown at this moment. And you can imagine how people reacted at the time. So this movie, The Wizard of Oz, was made in 1939. But primitive color systems for movies had been patented as early as 1899. Color technology existed. Some early films, even silent films, had limited color sequences inserted into them, into films that were primarily black and white. A lot of times, if there was one big musical number in a black and white picture, that number would be in color. But those early films used a very primitive two-color process where the image was split into red and green, and then red and green were combined to produce color. But that system could only produce...
I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
That system could only produce a limited range of color. So it wasn't until the invention of three-strip Technicolor in 1932 that Hollywood films were able to show the full spectrum of color. Three-strip, as the name implies, divided the image into three colors, red, blue, and yellow. And when you combined those three images together into one image, you got full color. And the first Hollywood feature shot entirely in this new three-strip process was a film called Becky Sharp, which was made by RKO in 1935. Interestingly, these early Technicolor cameras had a negative effect on camera mobility, very similar to what we saw earlier happening to camera mobility with the advent of sound. Because each camera used three sets of negatives simultaneously, one for blue, one for yellow, and one for red, these three negatives had to run through one camera. So the cameras were enormous, much larger and heavier than black and white cameras. That is an early Technicolor camera, and you can just see how huge a machine that is. And in addition to that, the process of splitting the image across these three negatives required much more light than conventional cameras. So sets had to be lit with these incredibly powerful and hot arc lights that literally could damage actors' eyes and made the temperature on set go to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit if you were acting. And so this caused the actors in The Wizard of Oz, which is probably the most famous of these early three-strip Technicolor films, to occasionally faint on set when they were shooting that picture because the temperature of the lights was so high and they were all wearing very heavy makeup and those crazy costumes. And so if you read about the production of that film, there was a lot of fainting on set and a lot of takes ruined because actors lost consciousness. So Technicolor fell out of favor in the 1950s with the development of a different kind of film called Eastman color. And Eastman color was a what they called a monopack technology that only required one negative. So it could be shot with smaller cameras and less light, and mobility by that time had returned. And color itself became so prevalent in Hollywood films that now, black and white pictures are really, like, black and white is only used as a self-conscious attempt to be artistic or to conjure up memories of a bygone era. In films like this, Peter Bogdanovich's The Last Picture Show. This movie was made in 1971 when color obviously had become the de facto standard, but Bogdanovich chose to shoot it in black and white for solely aesthetic reasons, artistic reasons. And it's a beautifully shot movie. And the movie he made after this, Paper Moon, and I recommend both these films. They're great 70s movies. Paper Moon was also shot in black and white. And I think that film takes place during the Depression in the United States in the 1930s. So Bogdanovich felt that black and white was evocative of that time. But black and white really is only used now purposefully. And color is, of course, the de facto standard, so much so that my Gen Z nieces and nephew literally refuse to watch any movie that isn't in color. They will not watch something in black and white, which is amazing to me because some of the greatest films ever made, obviously were made before color technology existed. So we take all of these technologies, editing, sound, and color, completely for granted now. They're just standard parts of the cinematic experience. But it's important to remember that they all had to be invented and adopted over time. And with the advent of each of these new technologies, movies changed to best take advantage of them and to create the immersive experience that we all now enjoy and we all completely take for granted. So I just want to say our next session will be on Tuesday, July 15th at the same time, and we'll be discussing the business of Hollywood, how changes in the way movies were distributed and marketed affected Hollywood and American movies during the golden era. So I hope you will join me for that. And now if people have questions, let me see. Modern movies get a lot of criticism for being shot on green screens and looking fake as a result. However, as you point out, many old movies were shot on totally fabricated sound stages. How would you consider this to be similar or different in terms of authenticity, artistic merit, etc.? It's a really good question, and to me, it's kind of a matter of taste. There's something beautiful about the human hand that's obvious in practical effects. And, it requires more of a willing suspension of disbelief when you're looking at a set that's obviously a set or a special effect that's obviously fake. I mean, the whole discussion is kind of ironic because everything in a movie is fake, I mean, just by nature, they are fakery. But, as Picasso supposedly said, art is the lie that tells the truth. And I think for me, well, first of all, digital technology, the way it stands now, can look as fake as a soundstage from the 1940s. Like, you know that it's digital. I mean, they can do incredible things with computers, but anybody who watches lots of movies is like, oh, now that's CGI, and especially when you see things, the thing that always takes me out of the experience of watching a picture is when there are sort of virtual camera movements that just reflexively, no camera could do. You're basically breaking the laws of physics, and that takes me out of the experience of watching a picture. I would much rather watch. There's a famous American filmmaker from the 1950s named Ray Harryhausen, who was famous for claymation, animating clay models, and really took that to these incredible lengths. There's a very famous movie he made called The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, where you see a human actor sword fighting with skeletons who are animated puppets. And it was all done, obviously, years before digital technology existed. And when you watch, it's obviously fake, but there's just something so incredible about the fact that human beings were able to conjure up this imagery by hand. And that's why I think, Christopher Nolan will only use practical effects. He's really adamant about that. Wes Anderson makes a lot of movies using stop motion rather than digital technology. And there's just something more organic, I think. It's all fakery, but there's something more organic about practical effects and just sort of human constructed rather than computer constructed fakery. But again, it's really a matter of taste. And I think, I'm older, and if you grew up only watching CGI movies, CGI was invented in my lifetime. So I definitely have had lots of experiences. I had lots of experiences with movies before those effects existed. And that obviously affects my take on it. As we say, it's all good. Do you anticipate a huge step forward in cinematic technology along the lines of sound being introduced within our lifetimes? It seems like at one point in time, studios thought that 3D technology would be received along these lines, but this has not been the case. That's true. And something I wanted to talk about today and didn't really have time to get into because it's a big topic, is the very dry topic of what is called the aspect ratio, which is just basically the size of the image on the screen. And, older movies are in Academy ratio, which is essentially a square. And then in the 1950s, when television was invented, the studios felt they had to compete with television. Everybody could watch movies at home. So they had to create an experience in the theater that was greater than that to get people to go out to theaters. And so they invented widescreen technologies, anamorphic technologies like VistaVision or CinemaScope. And now, you can create those technologies very easily digitally. And again, to name check Wes Anderson, if you watch Wes Anderson movies, he changes aspect ratio within his movies, depending on, a lot of times if he's telling a nested story, scenes that take place in one time period will have a different aspect ratio than scenes that take place in a different time period. So 3D was another response to television to try and get people into theaters. And I can't imagine that. I guess maybe the next plateau would be to create a virtual reality movie experience where, you're wearing a headset and you can choose to look around a 360-degree environment while the story is happening. But I would say, to me, and again, I'm old, I would say that a really inherent part of cinema is that watching a movie forces you to look where the director wants you to look. It's different than a play. When you're just looking at a play, you can choose to look at any actor you want to look at. And directors of plays will use lighting cues and throw focus in a certain direction to try and get you to pay attention to what they want you to pay attention to. But to me, the whole point of cinema is that a director says, I want to cut to a close-up here where she's crying. You know, I want you to see her face very tight on camera, and that is the art form. You know, the way the story is told is the story. And I think, you know, the whole thing about sort of these newer digital technologies is they put all the power in the viewer. And you know, I'm not saying that that's not a legitimate experience, but that's not cinema. You know, that's not what movies are. But I suppose, you know, just given the way things are going, it's going to be AI produced virtual reality experiences. And I think that's, you know, that's already taking the place of movies. Like, movies are a dying art form. And younger people who grew up with the internet and digital technology have trouble sitting still for 2 hours in a theater, for sure. So I think, you know, obviously there'll be technological changes that affect the way we experience content, but I don't know if that experience could be called cinematic, or if that content could really be called movies. When you talk about Russian directors influencing Hollywood directors, how did films from directors like Vertov reach the US in the early 20th century? How did the American film industry's awareness of international cinema develop over time? You know, I don't want to front. I really don't know. You know, I mean, movies were physical objects that could easily be transported around the world. And, you know, I know even today, artists want to see other artists' work and appreciate it and learn from it. And so I think just the word got out that, you know, the Soviets were doing these really amazing things with film. And, you know, all you have to do is put a print of a movie on a ship, and then you can make copies of it, and people can watch it. I mean, it was an analog technology, but you still could just, you know, physically get your hands on a picture and watch it. And I assume that's what happened. You know, I don't know that for sure. I don't see how else it could have happened. And obviously, you know, people would have read about, there would have been reviews of Soviet films, and, you know, just like today, but slower. Sorry, how did the American film industry's awareness of international cinema develop over time? Well, you know, in the previous talk, I sort of talked about the Hollywood melting pot and about how welcoming Hollywood was of foreign talent, especially people who were fleeing World War II. And, you know, I think it's the same thing. Like, we just saw a clip from Sunrise, that great silent film from 1928. F.W. Murnau was German, and was such a successful and kind of artistically pioneering filmmaker in Germany that his work became sort of famous in the United States, and Fox, you know, got him to move to the States, you know, offered him a lot of money, and he came to Hollywood. And so, you know, then you start getting a German expressionist influence on American movies. And that, you know, reaches full flower in film noir in the 40s and 50s. You know, that a lot of the directors in that genre were Germans who had come up making expressionist movies, silent movies at UFA in Berlin during the 20s, you know, people like Fritz Lang. So, you know, I think we forget, you know, we're so interconnected now digitally. It seems like in the past, people weren't as connected. They were. It was just slower. You know, there's no internet. So, you know, things traveled by post. Movies came over on reels on a ship. But, you know, people still were able to appreciate and learn from each other's work. Oh, and an audience says, thank you. This was informative. Glad I somehow got recommended this. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody who watches. And like I said, our next session is going to be about kind of a seemingly dry topic. I'll try and make it not so dry, which is just business, the business of Hollywood and finance, how the sort of financial constraints of making movies affected movies. And I'm just gonna, there's one more question. How did the development of cinema technology affect the accessibility of filmmaking for independent directors who were not part of the studio system? That's a really good question because, again, living in the world we live in now, where literally every person on the planet has a movie camera in their pocket, that was most certainly not the case in the golden era of Hollywood. It was really virtually impossible to make a feature film outside of the studio system just because of the technology you needed. You know, everything involved in the making of films were expensive, huge analog machines that the average person could not afford. I mean, you saw in that presentation how big a Technicolor camera was. You know, it was just a huge machine. And Technicolor infamously would not sell any of their cameras. You had to rent it from them. That's still really kind of true. The vast majority of Hollywood films, like cinematographers, don't own cameras. The studio rents the cameras that cinematographers use even today. And there's some financial chicanery there because the studio then charges themselves the cost of renting the thing that they rented so they can write that off as a tax deduction. And it's very complicated. But now, you know, it's very easy. Like you can shoot something on your phone and edit it on your laptop. And that's incredible. During this time period, independent filmmakers did not exist. It was just physically impossible from a mechanical standpoint. And you don't really see any kind of independent cinema really until the 1960s and when sort of cheaper cameras were invented. And even then, you know, there was a high barrier of entry in terms of money and equipment. You know, it was a completely different world, and you really had to work for a studio if you wanted to make a movie. Yeah, so I want to say thank you to everybody, and hopefully you'll join us for the next session, which I believe is on July 15th, I think I said, and I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.